minority and majority and what that meant at the time of the founding of the Second Republic, and what was this great fear held by Madison and Hamilton and Washington and the others about the majority?
Well, my understanding of that is that there was a conflict between whether their order was more important than justice. Does that run into the same line of thought that you're...
Well, it's parallel, but there were debtors and there were creditors. The minority were creditors. The majority were debtors. That's why they had to overthrow the First Republic, because 6 of the 13 state legislatures were under the control of the debtor party.
Wow.
And they passed a bill called a stay law. A stay law was there will be no foreclosures for failure to make payments upon mortgage, either principal or interest. The creditors were just livid.
Small wonder.
They were just absolutely apoplectic. I mean, this violated the sanctity of contract. Now, what is it the Second Republic did? It established the sanctity of contract. It also provided absolute power of the purse and power of the sword to enforce contract. At the time of the founding of the Second Republic, or the coup d'etat against the First Republic, or the counter-revolution against the First Republic, or, if you will, anticipatory fascism as opposed to democracy. I mean, there's a lot of ways of working this out semantically, but basically what it did is it made damn sure the creditors ran it and ran it forever. Because if you look at the way the system is structured, it is impossible for the majority to, with the debtors, to ever achieve power within the national government. Which, in case you're interested, the draft of the Constitution of 1787, before it got to the Committee of Style, every place you find the word federal, you found the word national. It was a national government. The Committee of Style changed one word throughout the document. Where it said national, they changed it to federal, because that sugar-coated the pill, and it went down much better. The purpose was brilliant. Hamilton and Madison just came up with the most brilliant system ever devised to ensure the perpetuity of the rule of that minority that they loved so diligently, the rich, the well-born, the affluent, and the creditors. That is the minority to be protected. And the only minority that has ever been protected in this particular country. If you stop and reflect upon it, what other minority has ever been protected with the diligence and the enthusiasm and the alacrity of the rich and the creditors? Not a single one, I assure you. You can scale through all of the history for 215 years, if you will, and never will you find any minority more jealously protected than the damn creditors. Of course, how is it that someone becomes a creditor? Well, somehow they get that which is produced by others, right? Do you think the Rockefellers make their own income from work? By the sweat of their brow, they go out and wrest wealth from the planet? Good God, what a bizarre proposition. They're born. Yeah.
Even if the rich were to put in 16-hour days, why are they worth $71 million a year? And why is their
Because they said so.
much?
Because
No,
they
but,
said so.
I mean, even if, because some people, maybe they do work. Maybe they're workaholics and they're rich. But the fact
Go to
is,
Acapulco, you can find
well, I'm not saying, I'm not denying
millionaires
that.
by the...
I'm just saying, isn't it also a matter of why is their labor worth so much and
Because
somebody
they
who
said
works
so.
just as hard? Well, I mean, that's an important point, I think.
Well, but since we live in
Because
an autocracy, the autocrat gets to say what's cool, right?
Okay, but it's true not only of rich, I mean, it's true of, you know, the woman that cleans a building compared to a lawyer that earns $150,000 a year, or a teacher who earns $20,000 and a doctor who earns $200,000. I mean, there's only so much labor a person could put out.
You mean to say that nobody has more than 24 hours a day, no matter how hard they work at it?
Exactly. So why is there worth so much time?
Well, because they said so. Again, you're raising an absolutely appropriate question. What is the standard of judgment that would determine that one person, using Iacocca as the example, because his income in 90 was $8,000 an hour. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for the full year. Now, $8,000 an hour, that is not a question of did he earn it. There is no way in the world that anybody earns $8,000 an hour in terms of what people earn, say, changing diapers, which to me is fairly onerous occupation, or, you know, working, you know, a garbage route.
Or $4 a week.
Or mowing lawns. I mean, there are lots of things. I mean, for instance, if you want people who I think really do some of the most important work in the country, it's probably the agricultural workers who permit us to eat. I can't think of anything a hell of a lot more important. I mean, first is oxygen, second is water, and third is food on the priority list. And the people who provide food is not, you know, the merchants of grain.
Did anybody see the other evening on TV, they had a segment about a farmer who was probably going to have to fold, and he went to the bank for a loan and he was denied money. And so then instead they thought about what they could do, so they decided they were going to print their own, quote, money. It was like coupons or whatever you want to call it. And then they went to customers that they had and they said, you know, we will give you this document, that this coupon or whatever, and at the end of the summer you will get your 20 pounds of potatoes. And so they saved their farm that way.
Well, I tell you, if that works more than once, there's going to be a serious case of the government shutting them down, because technically that's right on the borderline of counterfeiting.
Well,
No, that's a barter system. That's just
People can sell futures and make.
They're getting real hard on barter systems too.
And they talked about several different businesses that, you know, couldn't get money through those normal channels of bank loans, but who were going out and getting it through people this way, individuals that they knew.
Well,
Change.
The reason why we're going to have a coup is precisely because we're being driven to extremities. Pat Buchanan is going to have his wet dream. The Supreme Court will in fact show up with swastikas. They will rule poverty a crime, and they will then have a blank check to lock up anybody who does not make $60K a year, and hold them indefinitely on the grounds that if they haven't committed a crime, it's only fortuitous, and probably they've committed several and simply hadn't been caught. The same philosophy my father had used whenever he paddled me. I didn't have it coming. It caught up with me for the times when he should have. It didn't.
Yeah, just in case I missed one.
Well, I mean, that's sort of a quasi-fascist theory, but if you apply it on a social level, I think we will have a system that is some amalgam of Brave New World, 1984, you know, and half a dozen other utopian visions that are... What? I missed what you said.
This was another thought here. I agree with you about the agricultural
Well,
support.
they deserve a whole lot,
Because,
but they don't get it.
no, and more farmers are being put out, and it concerns me, because then what will happen, we should think about this, we would then have co-op or corporate farming, and our food they could charge if they wanted. And I think...
That's the whole purpose of monopoly,
That's
is
right.
to drive any and all possible competition out, because what you develop initially an oligopolistic system where you have a concentration of a few groups operating in collusion. If the antitrust laws that were passed around the turn of the century were enforced today, you would essentially destroy the entire corporate system. If the Sherman and the Clayton antitrust acts were actually enforced today, seriously, and not the kind of BS that is being done, but I mean real enforcement, you would virtually destroy the entire corporate system as it exists today, under the existing law. Because, as was mentioned earlier, whenever the law is inconvenient to the elite that rules, they ignore it. I mean, they simply ignore it. Selective law enforcement, you know, as a part of the legal process.
I'm familiar with the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890, but not with the Clayton.
Oh dear, I don't have a book in front of me, and I haven't looked it up for years. 1895?
Yeah, Clayton, I don't know.
Well, there were the two that were right about the same time, and they worked in conjunction to try and break up the trusts. And that's what it was called then, was, in fact, Teddy Roosevelt, one of the true all-time humbugs, liars, fools, and general hypocrites, was the one who called himself a trust buster. Well, please remember that we got into the First World War from the guy who was voted in on the peace ticket, Wilson. You know, and if that's too far back in ancient history, remember LBJ, you know, vote for LBJ and save us from war in Vietnam. So we did.
I mean, Goldwater was.
Well, we voted for LBJ to keep us out of war in Vietnam, and boy, oh boy, did he ever.
We were in war, and the U.S. was involved in war in Vietnam, but remember they smeared Goldwater,
Yeah.
because Goldwater said that if he was honest, the damn fool, yeah, if he were elected
More or
president,
less.
he would bomb Haiphong Harbor near Hanoi, and people said, oh my God, we have to vote for LBJ, we can't have a crazy person like this. And what did LBJ do? One of the first things?
Bomb Haiphong.
Bomb Haiphong Harbor. You betcha.
Including some Russian jets. Well, but again, you know, you've got to start integrating this whole body of information. You've got to look at it as a totality and not approach it as discrete, isolated events. I mean, when you wake up in the morning, you've got to wake up with a memory. You know, I mean, the puppies wake up in the morning and they go, you know, golly gee whiz, a whole new world out there, and they just have to go out and run around in circles and investigate everything. I saw a great cartoon the other day, you know, it was puppy thought, you know, and there's this puppy, and on the end of the leash, you know, and he's going, what's that, what's that, what's that, gotta pee, what's that, what's that, what's that, gotta pee, what's that, what's that, what's that, gotta pee, you know. Well, that's the way most people in the United States live.
And I have another parable that it goes right along with that. Here's the cartoon. It shows a cat sitting in the corner of a room, staring at the corner. And then in the bubble that shows what the cat is thinking is a picture of a cat sitting in a corner, staring at the corner. The title is Catland. And that's the other half of the people that are thinking that.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Although my approach to all of this also has slightly heretical approaches, in that I remember the two cats sitting in the corner of the room, and the entire room is full of mice, and all the mice are all organized in ranks and rows, and they're all standing there looking at the cats, and the one cat says to the other, God, they got organized, we may have to negotiate. Well, but that's exactly what the government cannot permit. If the people of the United States recognize that they have a common interest with everybody else in this country, based upon the fact that they are debtors. I don't give a damn who you sleep with, I don't give a damn, you know, whether you're short, tall, black, white, I don't care what your plumbing is, I don't care what your, personal God might be, if any. You have a common interest called survival. And if survival is not the most important issue for you, then basically you might as well be a puppy, because you're just going to be out there and you're going to be roadkill. You're going to run in front of the first truck that comes down the road because you have never learned a thing. And the problem that the government has is making sure we all stay puppies.
Well, if I understand what you're getting at with the Supreme Court and with the government head of the executive branch, that it won't then be necessary for them to have a formal announcement that the Bill of Rights has been suspended.
Oh, God, no. Oh, God, no.
Is that right?
Oh, heavens, no. Please remember, the people went into the gas chamber with a bar of soap that was a shower. Please remember, you do not tell the frog what you're doing to him, because that would upset the frog. So after, here it is 1993, I finally get a copy of Executive Order number 12333, December 4, 1981, signed by dear old Fecal Brain, Bonzo's co-star, in which he succeeded in basically opening the floodgates of CIA operation in the United States. Does everybody know that, in fact, the CIA has now been authorized as of 1981 to operate inside the United States under executive order? Well, I mean, it's really kind of interesting. I mean, the way they write in the loopholes. The CIA, this is under 1.8 sub C, the Central Intelligence Agency, all duties and responsibilities, etc. Sub C, conduct counterintelligence activities outside the United States and, without assuming or performing any internal security functions, comma, conduct counterintelligence activities within the United States in coordination with the FBI. Now, excuse me, what did I just read there? It says, without assuming or performing any internal security functions, conduct counterintelligence activities within the United States. Now, is there a lawyer here? Pardon? You've got it. There's a complete contradiction there. With the FBI as required by procedures agreed upon by the Director of Central Intelligence and the Attorney General. At the time this was, I mean, how many people in Congress voted on this?
How many people in Congress vote on anything?
Well, this is an executive order.
Which means
How
that
many
that,
people anywhere on the planet? This is one man signing his name. Now, if that is not an autocrat, if that is not a tyrant, if that is not a monarch, or not an emperor, what the hell have we got if we do not have essentially a Caesar in the White House?
doesn't Congress have 30 days to repeal it if they can get 2/3 against it?
No,
That was, no?
not an executive order. They can override a commitment of forces under the War Powers Act within 60 days. If a majority of Congress opposes the President's action under the War Powers Act, which in fact the United States is in violation of the War Powers Act right now in Somalia, but the only person who ever said, the President's breaking the law was Henry B. Gonzalez. He said, the President's breaking the law. The rest of Congress said, and the PACs are going to give us how much again? You know, nobody listens to Henry B. because he is actually a person who believes in the Constitution, the balance of powers, due process of law, and, I mean, people consider him obsolete. Those don't count anymore. So they just ignore it.
A quick question. The number of violations of the Constitution instituted by the government, or various branches of the government, is uncountable over the last many, many, many years. My
Well, it
question
probably
is,
it's probably a finite
there's
number.
a finite number probably, but
But large, very
the
large.
permutations may be uncountable, but in any event, the question that arises in my mind is that how is it and why is it, what's the general mechanism that prevents a system that was initially designed to be self-correcting, prevents it from being self-correcting anymore? I mean, almost to the extent where it never, ever corrects these problems when they arise.
I can tell you one of the fundamental things that happened in this country, it was called Gay Edgar Hoover, who came to power at the time of World War I. And his mission in life was to ensure his permanent employment by the government as a director of secret police. And the first thing he did is he went out and he got blackmail information on every member of Congress, every member of the executive branch, State Department, every powerful person, either in public office or in private life. He got everything he could on everybody. And every time somebody would do something that he did not approve of, you know, he would just basically show them the picture, show them the report, whatever, and they would go, yes, a boss.
Well, that's what Watergate was all about. Why do you think all the presidents since then have consulted Nixon?
Well, actually, Nixon was taken out of office by the CIA.
Well, he's still got a lot of tapes and stuff on people.
Well, yeah, he does, and the fact that they didn't off him like they did some others is of some interest. I think he may have some insurance in terms of who else might go down with him.
Right.
He doesn't use his bodyguards anymore.
Pardon?
He doesn't use his bodyguards anymore. He's canceled the Secret Service from protecting him.
That was very generous of him. But when was the last time a mafia gun mall got buried that you can recall, when every major figure in the United States, including former presidents, showed up at the funeral? Pat Nixon. Hey, she was a mafia gun mall. I mean, Richard Nixon was up to here in the mafia, for crying out loud. And he wasn't born into it like the Kennedys. He aspired. He was a wannabe. He was a heavy-duty activist for organized crime from World War II on. I should have, in fact, brought in a substantial body of documentation on that tonight, since I knew I was going to say something crude and cruel about the gun mall. I mean, I'm sorry, I just, you know, it's the same problem I have with the Brady bill. You know, remember the mouthpiece for the co-star of Bonzo in the White House, Brady, James Brady, the mouthpiece for Ray Gunn, got a bullet through the head. You know, if it would have been Goebbels, would we have the Goebbels bill?
How about if it had been Galen?
General Reinhardt?
I think we would have had a Galen bill.
Well, actually, Galen was one of the chief organizers of the Central Intelligence Agency, whereas Goebbels was merely a propagandist, which is exactly what Brady was. I mean, I cannot, in my own good conscience, come up with any sympathy for Nazis and for people who abuse others and abuse systems and establish themselves in positions of power and privilege where they then can abuse others as though they were some kind of a medieval potentate. I cannot find sympathy for those people when something bad happens to them. I mean, they are not inside of my definition of people for whom I feel great sympathy. You know, but I am real cold-hearted about that. It was like when Anastasio Somoza made the mistake of trying to get the 13-year-old girlfriend of the head of the Paraguayan National Guard into bed, and the head of the Paraguayan National Guard opened his armored Mercedes up with a couple of RPGs and then hosed it down with 4 automatic weapons. I had a hard time coming up with a lot of sympathy for Somoza. You know, I really did. I didn't shed a single tear. You know, but, you know, I'm weird like that, you know. I mean, I try to look at the good guys, if something happens to them, I feel bad. And if they're bad guys, something bad happens to them, I figure it cancels.
What you didn't mention about those executive orders is...
Oh, I'm still going to go through some more of the executive orders so we know what's really happening to us.
Well, what I was going to say is that there's nothing that says they have to be made public.
No, as a matter of fact, it's a secret for years and years. It finally came out. And in fact, there are other, for instance, the FBI guidelines for domestic operations are classified. Excuse me, the guidelines are classified. Suppose you were an attorney and you had a client. How in the hell could you defend them if you don't know what even the guidelines are, what it's permissible for the FBI to do? But then, of course, you got, you know, all kinds of backdoor operations where the FBI says, well, we can't do it, so let's hire the ADL. You know, who are you? What right do you have to know what we're doing? I mean, why isn't it a matter of absolute legal requirement that the people in whose name the decisions are made have a right to see the work product of their employees?
Because then they wouldn't be in business.
Because we find new employees.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's exactly what a democracy is supposed to be.
Where's your democracy?
You know, the funny thing is, I read even the Iran-Contra scandal, the declassified history from the National Security Archives, and what do I read in the introduction? I read, the real danger to our democracy comes from within. Excuse me? The what to the which to the where? Excuse me? If you don't have a democracy, how can it be in danger? I mean, I have, in the last week, been reading through a whole bunch of new books and various things, and I keep running into the same problem. Everybody is saying, our democracy is in trouble! And I keep saying, isn't that an oxymoron? I mean, isn't it a non sequitur? If you don't have a democracy, how can it be in trouble? What we have, in fact, is what, you know, I described here, you know, where the prevention of justice is the sole and single obsession of a ruling elite that has degenerated from aristocracy through kakistocracy to a vile kleptocracy.
Yeah, boy.
I mean, we have a government of, by, and for the kleptocrats. If it's nailed down, they'll try and get the nail out, and they'll steal the nail too. What won't they steal? I mean, they want it all. There is no off button. They're like a rat with a lateral lesion of the hypothalamus. They can't quit eating. You can give them an 80-pound bag of grain, and this rat will go like this. He'll look like Rush Scumbag. You know, I mean, you'll see this little, you know, little nose, and his 2 little beady eyes, and these little whiskers, you know, and his little tie, you know, and and he'll limp his way, you know. I mean, they will die from eating. They can't quit. Now, that's the problem with our elite. They have a lateral lesion of the moral hypothalamus. They can't quit stealing. There is no limit. They'll steal it all. And I read, and these are not stupid people. I mean, these are the people who put together everything they can get their hands on is declassified. They sue the government constantly under FOIA to get more information. And they still don't understand what they're up against. They think this is a democracy. Well, I'm talking about, people like, Scott Armstrong, Tom Blanton, Malcolm Burns, et cetera. I mean, these are fairly savvy people. Why they say things like that, I just find absolutely bonkers. And then I got into Who Will Tell the People by William Greider, which I have heard more people, effervesce over lately. And it's got some interesting stuff in it, but did you happen to read his section on the Washington Post and Watergate? You won't even find out that they're CIA. You won't find out that the whole operation in the Washington Post is of, by, and for U.S. Espionage, Inc. I mean, this guy actually referred to Bob Woodward as a reporter. I mean, anybody who thinks Bob Woodward is a reporter is obviously just fallen off the turnip truck or is in fact working for the agency themselves. I mean, come on. Does everybody know his background in Office of Naval Intelligence, Task Force 157? Where he was working with people like Edwin Wilson and Turple. Turple is still missing. Wilson is doing 62 years in maximum security in Marion prison. I mean, here's a guy who, used to hobnob in the White House with Alexander Haig, right? He used to have a crypto channel that he shared with Henry Kissinger. This is a reporter? No, he's not. No, what he is a government agent. I mean, hell, he turned down a free, 100% full 4-year scholarship to Harvard Law to become a cub reporter in rural Virginia after he left the Office of Naval Intelligence. He spent 6 months as a cub reporter in rural Virginia, and Katharine Graham, who is also a member of the Trilateral Commission, the Bilderbergers, CFR, and her father was probably a high Jewish mafiosa who bought the paper back in the 30s. You can't find that out from Greider. You can't find out squat from Greider that counts. Who will tell the people? Gee, that's a good question. Not a former employee of the Washington Post, where he worked. Please note the Progressive magazine is also edited by a former employee of the Washington Post, Erwin Noel. I mean, these people are everywhere, and you keep hearing this, oh my God, the betrayal of American democracy. Excuse me? That happened in 1789. American democracy was essentially betrayed in 1789, and it has never recovered. And it's not supposed to.
Occasionally, avenues do appear for the people to find out. People like yourself and Noam Chomsky, Michael Parenti.
As long as the subject is not the JFK assassination,
yeah, well,
Professor Chomsky does a remarkable job. As soon as the subject of JFK comes up, he
kind
goes...
of veers off into a... But there are people like yourselves that do tell the people a great deal.
Yeah.
The people that come and listen. You don't get the press time. You don't get the exposure that the big media gets. But you are there, and many more people are becoming aware of you.
I would love to be on McNeil Liar and come up against the real paragons of quackery like Henry Kissoff.
My question is that if that exposure were available, or if it were possible,
would it make any difference?
That's my question. My question is, would the American people have not this? Would they care? Let's assume that they would care. Let's assume that they would want to do something about it.
The truth is too shocking. Most people don't want to accept it at first glance.
Let's just for the sake of
what
argument,
could they do, even if they did?
That's my question. What could they do? What avenues exist for the people to actually respond?
Well, I can tell you a little story that I heard from a nice old man back in the 60s when we were talking about how the Titanic seemed to be settling into the water a little deeper all the time, just like it did in the 30s. And he was in his 60s then, And he said, well, you know, I was living in Kansas as a youngster in the 30s, and we had the sheriff, you know, foreclose on a farm and put it on the auction block, you know, and sell it to some damn banker from back east, you know, for a song. And he said, we got real upset about that. We got together at the Grange, and we talked about it, and we decided, well, hey, you know, why don't we all get together, go down to the courthouse, about 10,000 of us, with our guns. And they did. They had their 12-gauge shotguns and their 30-30 rifles, and they all went down very orderly down to the county seat, to the courthouse. There's the sheriff and his 6 deputies and the judge and the 3 extra, you know, secondary judges. And they had a nice orderly, you know, committee go into the courthouse and present an order to the sheriff and the judge, advising them that at the next foreclosure, they would all come back to the courthouse and they would deliver the courthouse to the sheriff and the judge 1 brick at a time. And the sheriff looked out, and here are 10,000 people with a glint of gun barrels. It's amazing how effective that can be. You don't have to hurt anybody, you just have to make them absolutely certain that there are going to be consequences.
How to organize in such a way.
How to organize
For instance,
that.
we all...
Just having said it on tape, which will be going out to several hundreds or more people, I'm reminding them of their real history. I know, for instance, when I was on a picket line with oil and atomic workers down in Richmond, California, about, I guess it would have been about 69 or 70, you know, Standard Oil was out to, you know, bust the union. Well, you know, the nice, you know, Archie Bunker types, you know, weren't sure they liked us, you know, left-wing college kid types, but all of a sudden they found out that their only allies were people out of the anti-war movement, civil rights movement, etc. That their real allies were other people, not the rich. The problem was not left to right. The problem was top to bottom. And so we got a whole bunch of, you know, real, you know, sort of burly, surly, you know, motorcycle type, you know, hippie type, long hair, you know, whatever. And we went out, we just about doubled their picket line. And we were out on a point, and here was a bunch of the Richmond pigs, you know, and they were all off here by themselves. And there was a bunch of us going around, and we had, you know, picket signs about like this, you know, but our handles were 2x2s that were 6 feet long. And I had put 2 hand grips for a cudgel stick on mine, so I'm walking around with my, you know, picket sign on its stick. And the cops all suited up, and they got all ready, and they're all lined up, and we're going, I want the one on the left. I want the big one in the middle. I want to break his knees, you know. And we're all just giving these cops every brand of bleep you can think of. And they're all, did you ever see The Search for the Holy Grail? You remember the
Monty Python?
Yeah, Monty Python, Search for the Holy Grail, you know, King Arthur gets up there and goes, run away, you know, and that's what the cops did. They got up there, and we're all going, come on, you suckers! The cops go, run away. They got back in their cars, took off their gas masks, put their shields away, took off their, I mean, they were out there, they looked like blue-painted medieval wackos. I mean, these guys had exoskeletons. They had so much body armor, and I mean, they had 80-pound, Sam Brown belts and BS. I mean, and it was August.
Oh.
Sweat. You know, just, I mean, these poor suckers were miserable. You know, I mean, they'd have almost preferred to get, you know, hit in the head and take off the gear and just lay on the ground and, conk out. I mean, it was absurd.
Dealing on the federal level,
The
recourses that the government can bring to to bear.
They won't nuke Portland. I can assure you. They will not nuke it because they own it. That's our only security.
Ace, what if that guy's petition had gone through from Southern Oregon where they would have put yes and no on the ballot?
There are things like that that are possible if we never get approved, make a hell of a difference. I mean, if we could, for instance, get a real right to know bill passed. I mean, if we had the right to see any and all public records, because we're the public, we own the records, they put over 1 million documents per year into the secret file. How in the hell can they do that? Answer, because we let them.
Isn't that a need to know?
Got it.
I think the people have an absolute need to know what their government's doing.
Yeah.
The government does not need to know what the people are doing. It's the other way around.
Exactly.
And what we have now is a complete reversal. It's kind of like, you know, the tail and the dog. Well, the tail is wagging the dog. And the dog is, you know, getting his head bounced off, you know, the wall, you know, and eventually, if the dog has the brains that you expect the average dog to have, he's going to reach around and bite off the tail. Or at least explain to the tail why it ought not to be doing what it's doing, and if it doesn't quit doing it, something bad's going to happen to it. I mean, that's where, you know, the rubber meets the road, folks. If you look at history, there has never been a rapacious oligarchy that was ripping off everybody in the country and getting away with it that did not so continue unless or until something stopped it. Imperial force, then he's absolutely right. I mean, look what happened to the American troops that were out in the pucky brush in Vietnam. Some no-good, lousy little commie pervert, you know, in black pajamas and B.F. Goodrich sandals, might sneak up in the middle of the night, drop a grenade in his lap. I mean, just because he was defending his own country, I mean, what right did he have to do something like that? I mean, it's exactly what happened when the British marched out to Lexington and Concord and said, you will give us your powder magazine and your lead and your patches and your artillery and the rest of it. And the dumb, you know, Viet Cong of Massachusetts said, stick it in your ear and open fire. I mean, why is it that the people of the United States, who should have every sympathy with revolutionaries around the world, end up in sympathy with their oppressors?
Well, the first action of the fascists in Germany, before the Nazis got complete and total power, was to disarm the public. It was one of their first.
Their gun control law of 1938 is the model for the proposed gun control legislation in the United States. Because, in fact, the people who run the government of the United States are, in fact, Nazis. And if you think that doesn't include Bill Clinton, I have got some wonderful beachfront property in New Mexico that I'm selling at a modest price.
So nobody could think of anything better. They had to go back to the 30s to use that as an example. They couldn't think of anything better. They just had to use the same old stuff.
Well,
I hate to tell you, but if you look at, for instance, how come it is E. Howard Hunt turns up in every scandal for 25 years? How come we have people like General Vernon Walters who turn up in every coup d'etat from 1953 on, up to and including the taking down of the Berlin Wall in 1989, where he was the ambassador to West Germany. He was in Fiji 2 weeks before the coup there in 87. He was in Brazil 2 weeks before the coup there in 65. He was in Indonesia 2 weeks before the invasion of East Timor and the slaughter of over 250,000 people. I mean, they don't need a new cast of characters, nor do they need new laws, nor do they need new anything. If you go back and you look at history, you discover that the reason why it keeps repeating itself is precisely because everybody studies history. And the people who run the world study history. That's why Kissinger thinks he's Metternich, on whom he did his PhD dissertation. Well, he knows more about Metternich than Metternich ever knew. You know, it's just like, you know, there are people, you know, who study somebody so well that they end up knowing more about the person than the person ever knew. Like if I take my FBI files and go through it, I find out stuff I'd forgotten about years ago. You know, I mean, they know more about me than I do. And they know where I lived, you know, I mean, what my license plate numbers were, you know, what I subscribed to, articles that appeared wherever. I mean, they're all happily clipped and in the files. You know, hell, I'd forgotten 9/10 of that if I hadn't, you know, if I ever knew it. So that's why history tends to repeat itself, but there are key players like General Vernon Walters, or people like Reinhard Galen, or Alan Dulles, or et cetera, et cetera. They keep reappearing in each new scene. It's kind of like the, remember the Mission Impossible?
Yeah.
Every week they came up with the same agents, throwing down the pictures, you remember?
Oh, yeah.
They were always the same one. And it was the first time they had a real colorblind casting, because they had this black guy who was posing as a Polish colonel in the movie, you know, in the TV program. Well, I mean, how many, you know, Afro-American Polish colonels have you ever met? You know, I mean, it was just, I mean, I thought it was neat because they were casting him in a completely colorblind way. He was just an actor.
He was a good actor.
Yeah. No, I mean, I thought it was cool. But on the other hand, if you took the program seriously, and this was really a guy who was one step above the CIA and doing a real covert operation in communist Poland, you ain't going to use an Afro-American, right? I mean, it plays good inside the U.S., but if you were doing a realistic program, you would not have made such a selection. But he had to be a cast member, so they couldn't have him, you know, as the femme fatale. You know, I mean, that would have been less credible. You know, but they keep using the same characters and the same scripts because there aren't that many scripts.
Actually, if he were going to hit up on J. Edgar Hoover, he might have done well in that previous role you mentioned.
That's true. I understand his cocktail dress is going to be put into the Smithsonian.
No.
For real?
That's the wonderful thing. You don't know whether it's a satire. But the thing that was so evil about Hoover is that he, in fact, was one of the most vicious gay bashers in the entire United States.
That's right.
He was one of the most vicious anti-homosexuals in the United States. And that's one of the interesting things. It's a compensatory mechanism because you find that Fitz Channel, the guy who died of AIDS, who was the main fundraiser for Ollie North, who used to use money raised from blue hairs going to the Contras, he was skimming it to pay his own personal bills. And he, in fact, contributed $500 to a gay bashing outfit in Texas. I mean, the thing I have a hard time with is hypocrisy. I mean, honest people, I mean, I can respect honest people if they're honest. I mean, even people who say, I'm an absolute coward, and I do not want to know anything about anything the government's doing because if I found out, it would just upset me. Hey, I can respect that because it's honest. What I can't respect is people who lie to themselves and therefore have to lie to everybody else. And I don't give a damn what the lie is, I don't like it. Because ultimately, the only way we're ever going to make any sense as a society, as a community, and as individuals is if we can be honest with ourselves and with each other. I mean, if you disagree with somebody about something, say so. You know, you don't have to be totally hostile about it or unpleasant, but you can say, hey, I don't agree. You know, and if the government does something like Waco, you basically have to say, we want to prosecute the people responsible for this because they're involved in mass murder. And in fact, we need to prosecute under the Yamashita decision, which means that failure to prevent war crimes is a crime, and in fact, it's a capital crime, and you can be executed for it. Oh, I would just love to be able to try General Reno under the Yamashita precedent. Yeah. And, I mean, anybody who can spend 15 years in Dade County and can't catch Jeb Bush is obviously not a real serious law enforcer.
How come she was never married or never had any children?
We don't know, number one, that she was never married, and second, we don't know that she never had a child.
Would you marry that?
What are you talking about?
General Reno.
I heard actually.
Whether she's married or had a kid to do with her law enforcement, what are you talking about?
I'm saying that she may be like a narcissist. She may be somebody who can't get along with others real well, and that might be part of the reason why she's where she is today.
No, one of her strengths that they billed her on before Waco was that she loved children.
Okay.
Well done. Barbecued or fried? I mean, that's like the Veterans Department serves veterans, you know, poached, barbecued, broiled, you know, I mean, the Veterans Department serves veterans, right? In all kinds of different ways.
Tomorrow night on KBAN Radio, Dr. Burgess is going to be on with Truman from 7 p.m. to 8:30 discussing Waco. And he was a doctor that was actually there while this was happening.
Right, I've talked to him. He has a lot of good information.
Yeah, the show's from 7 to 10, but the doctor will just be on from 7 to 8:30.
And that is way up at the high end of the AM dial.
Oh,
1550 or something? Yeah.
Well, it's basically hiding in the grass if you're more than 20 miles out. But, yeah, no, I've talked to Dr. Burgess. He's got some very interesting and useful information. The interesting Waco 911 program that was on Nightline, I got a transcript of it and made copies. I mean, let's face it, if you were the bad guy, would you call 911 and say, hey, we're being attacked? You know, the whole thing that happened in Waco, as far as I'm concerned, every person who was a party to it, and every person in a command position all the way up the line, up to and including the President and the Attorney General, Director of FBI, everybody, as far as I'm concerned, ought to be prosecuted, because these are major, major, major felonies. There has not been that many people killed in that short a period of time in any operation inside the United States that I can recall in my lifetime. And anybody top 80-plus bodies? I mean, you talk about serial killers, you talk about nutcakes who drive into restaurants with guns and start blazing. I'm sorry, but I mean, this is absolutely the world record for homicide, unless somebody can come up with something I don't know about.
It was sanctioned by the U.S. government.
Pardon?
It was sanctioned by the U.S. government.
Well, it was the U.S. government.
I mean, that's not counting things like economic ways of doing that. For example, what people like Michael Milken have done to the economy by just closing down literally hundreds of businesses and putting literally tens of thousands of people out of work.
Well, did everybody catch the little notice here on the streets? Homeless in downtown Los Angeles. A new study has found that 77,000 people are homeless on any given night in L.A. County, and that has gone up 13% from last year.
Jesus.
Now, that's probably a real conservative estimate.
Well, that's not the high side numbers, that's the low side numbers.
That's what they know about.
Right.
That's what they'll admit.
You know, I mean, but, you know, here it is, right in the Oregonian, dated today, Wednesday, the 30th of June. You know, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Count about 10 in this one picture. You know, sleeping on a sidewalk. There was another interesting little article on how you can make $436,000 and pay no taxes by investing in tax-exempt municipal bonds.
Well, isn't Clinton trying to change that? I mean, in all forward fronts and misinformation, isn't he trying to change that?
He may be trying, but so does a steer. You know, I mean, it's a question of how hard is he trying and how serious is he. But the fact is, that's been the law for 30 or 40 years. I mean, this is not new. This has been around forever. In fact, you will discover if you go through Ross Perot's financial disclosure statement from 1992 to the FEC that he has hundreds of millions of dollars in tax-exempt municipal bonds, including Oregon state bonds from which he received in excess of $1 million interest income in 1992 alone. You know, while at the same time the state of Oregon pension fund is giving money to KKR for a leveraged buyout of RJR Nabisco, which in turn is buying out Safeway, which is in turn buying out Fred Meyer.
So there are barbarians at the gate, aren't there?
Yeah, actually, and there are governments.
The people that actually carry out things like the Waco massacre, I mean the BATF that were there and did it. I think that it's, I've been debating on a bulletin board in Portland, a computer modem bulletin board system, with several people about Waco. And one of the arguments that I've presented recently, and it's been debated, is the issue of personal responsibility on the part of those police. That those police should be held individually as responsible as the German soldiers who said, I did it because I was ordered, it's not my fault.
You mean to say that the plea of just following orders does not work at the Nuremberg and shouldn't work at Waco?
Yes.
I will accept that with no difficulty whatsoever. I would concur. Anybody here oppose the proposition of individual responsibility for criminal behavior? Golly, wouldn't that be a novelty? Do you realize we're starting to talk like a bunch of Democrats? Small d. Here's a copy of the book, War Crimes, a report on United States war crimes against Iraq, Ramsey Clark and others. In here I have a clipping on the UN Ready's first war crimes trial since World War II. But no, they're not trying George Bush. There's obviously something terribly amiss here. So if you're interested in war crimes committed by the United States, which ought to be prosecuted, here's an excellent source. And of course it's interesting, Ramsey Clark is basically a non-person in the media. You do not hear his name or read anything about any of his work. And if you read the so-called progressive press, you find out that he's associated with Lyndon LaRouche and is totally unacceptable. Never mentioning the fact that he in fact has been very active in trying to prosecute U.S. war crimes. Really some wonderful stuff, but if you want to know more about why there was a Gulf War, I go to really far out radical publications, you know. I really like to go to Time magazine because people say, "Ah, you commie pervert," you know, you and your commie propaganda. You know, well, the French just sold $3.5 billion in state-of-the-art AMX Leclerc battle tanks to United Arab Emirates. And since, when was the Gulf War over? 2 years, right? 2 years?
I didn't think it was over.
Well,
Which one?
but I mean officially.
Oh.
The
2 years ago.
how many people are aware that since the Gulf War, the Gulf Cooperation Council alone has placed $40 billion in military hardware orders?
Well, good business.
Wow. That's not counting the 3.5 billion orders from France that United Arab Emirates just put in. That's just one little bit. But so they have this final exam, Gulf War 101. I thought was kind of neat. Instructions: circle the correct answer. Answers at the bottom, sponsored by Education for Peace and Justice. 1. In 1975, when Indonesia invaded the newly independent country of East Timor, eventually killing 15% of the country's total population, 100,000 persons, what subsequent actions did the United States take? A. Sent troops to militarily remove Indonesia. B. Applied severe economic sanctions to Indonesia. C. Called to the United Nations to permit the use of any means necessary to expel Indonesia. Or D. Supplied Indonesia with additional weaponry. D. Yeah, that's trouble with preaching to the choir. They already knew the answers anyway.
Henry Kissinger gave them the go-ahead before and said that it would not be a problem for the United States if they invaded. Sound familiar?
He was there as the Secretary of State for a President Ford, not a Lincoln, right?
I'm sorry.
President Ford, not a Lincoln. He was there with Jerry Ford.
He told them that
Yeah.
not a problem.
Not a problem. Well, April Glaspie told Saddam Hussein, not a problem. We have no peace treaty or defense treaty with Kuwait. Not a problem. Well, sometimes you see, sometimes it means yes and sometimes it means no. I mean, you talk about date rape. I mean, anybody who plays footsie with the U.S. government's looking for date rape. Hey, folks, there's something really strange going on here. There's something, I mean, this is called the strategy of tension if we were in Europe. I mean, this is a direct effort to terrorize, destabilize, and control people through fear. And in fact, we now have hysterical wackos. Team group advocates Brady Bill. But let us please remember, who did James Brady work for? Ronald Reagan. Now, suppose by analogy, Dr. Goebbels had taken a round in the head while an attempt was made to shoot Adolf Hitler. Now, would we have a Goebbels bill?
It depended or not on whether or not Hinckley liked Eva Braun.
You're crazy as hell.
Would we have a Goebbels bill? I'm asking a serious question.
But the Brady Bill is based on Nazi law.
Well, of course.
So it is the same thing.
Except that, in fact, in this country, we are totally schizoid. We hate Nazis and we love Brady. That's like saying, I'm not sitting here. I mean, it only requires complete screaming insanity.
But it's textually the same thing as the Nazi law.
Well, of course.
And I can't wait for some good double plus good ribbons
double
to
plus,
tie
yeah.
up.
Ribbons, yeah.
Yeah, in lieu of waiting for this all to happen.
Yeah.
I thought the Brady Bill was just gun control. I'm lost here.
Well, but look.
There's a teeth of the Second Amendment is a teeth of the first. All right?
Well, the thing is, if you lose number 2 out of the 10, the other 9 are goners. Because when push cometh to shove, the means of power are absolutely essential to preserve your power. And anybody who thinks that they are going to have their rights respected when they are unable to enforce respect for what is their right has missed the last, I guess, 3,300 years of human history.
Well, can we now enforce our rights?
I know this much. Very few people want to be the first one to fuck with me. You know, that's where the rubber meets the road, is somebody's got to be number 1. Now, a lot of people want to be number 2. In fact, that's one of the things I learned in the Cuban Revolution. You always get the point man. The guy out in front is the one who always ends up buying the farm. And therefore, suddenly, it became about as popular as the case of the clap to become the point man. Because they said, you've set up 3 guns or more on the first guy. Now, all of a sudden, the first guy is going, oh, I don't like this. And he becomes, in fact, so cautious that frequently the patrol wouldn't make it a mile. You know, let's face it, what kind of an inducement is there to be the point man when you know if you run up against the bad guys, you are dead. Period. End of subject. Not negotiable. You are dead.
You switch point men, just like combat. Everybody gets 10 minutes, point man.
Now, that changes to Russian roulette. During your 10 minutes, your enthusiasm, however, might be a little bit deficient.
But it works, because if you had 15 minutes, you wouldn't do it.
However, that does not enhance the speed of operations when you have to keep switching. The point, however, is absolutely valid. I mean, there's a lot of people who are perfectly willing to be number 2. Pardon?
He's on the shelf somewhere, isn't he?
No, I'm just saying, you know, that it goes clear back to the very beginning. I mean, we did not get this country, and we did not get the Bill of Rights because a lot of people sat around, drank a lot of coffee, and argued with each other, and said, "Oh, wouldn't it be nice?" You read the last paragraph of the Declaration of Independence. It says, "We pledge our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor." And if you think that that was just some kind of rhetoric, you never heard about Colonel Tarleton. Anybody here know about Colonel Tarleton, the colonel of the Royal Dragoons? I saw a hand go up. Tell us about Colonel Tarleton.
Did they shoot him?
Who?
Tarleton?
No, you don't know the history there, old buddy.
Prisoners, and at the end...
It was called Tarleton's Quarter. Tarleton's Quarter. And they had, in those days, what was called a saber. The guns back then went bang. Bang! You know, it was not exactly high speed firing, but a saber about so long, damn, those things were real efficient killing machines at close quarters. In fact, a saber is just as efficient a killing machine at close quarters as any gun ever invented. And that's exactly what they did to every person they took prisoner. They killed every person they captured without exception. It was called Tarleton's Quarter. And in fact, Colonel Tarleton and his troops went in the front door of Jefferson's house at Monticello 15 minutes after Jefferson had gone out the back door, because he had people out watching, and they saw Tarleton cavalry coming, and they got to the house by a shortcut and said, "Excuse me, sir, but it might be expedient for you to get your butt out of here." And he said, "Right on." And he went, choom, gone. Otherwise, he would not have died of old age. I mean, these were real people who really, hey, you think that they didn't have a little adrenaline when they signed that piece of paper? You know, I mean, they had just signed their own death warrant. Literally. Had they been captured, that was high treason. They would have been executed for sure and for certain. It was not rhetoric.
I had my hand up earlier to ask the question.
I'm sorry, I missed you.
Of the 60 or 70, I can't remember the number of people who signed the Declaration of Independence.
56, as I recall.
Ended up either being killed or having their homesteads burned, to where when they got around to signing the Constitution 10 or 12 or 13 years later, there were only 6 or 7 people who signed the Declaration alive.
Well, but actually, the people who did the Declaration of Independence were almost a completely different set of people.
Exactly, yep.
But that, not for that reason that they were dead. It was because they were revolutionaries, and the people who put the Constitution 1787 together were the counter-revolutionaries. There was a split in America between the two dominant factions in the war for independence. Just exactly, I mean, everybody knows what happened in Nicaragua. There were the Sandinistas, and then there was the, Chamber of Commerce, and the Catholic hierarchy and the landowners. They had all been allied until Somoza fled. And as soon as they won, then of course the division occurred and they split. And then they went, at each other, and because the United States poured the bucks in, billions literally, into the freedom fighters, the moral equivalent of our founding fathers, a statement that was so bestial and so absolutely ignorant and or so totally cynical and Nazi-like that my opinion of Ronald Reagan went up.
History. You're talking about our popular ex-president?
A man who is absolutely, without exception, one of the most evil geniuses of the 20th century. The man did his job brilliantly from the day he was Agent T10 for J. Edgar Hoover as an undercover operative in Hollywood, when he became the president of the Screen Actors Guild and brought the mafia in, and went to work for the CIA doing propaganda films. And then he went up and he prototyped his entire presidency in California, where he got Gia Frida and his own little in-house FEMA operation. And I mean, the man has been an absolutely brilliant Machiavellian who has been run by the finest espionage apparatus of the 20th century, General Reinhard Gehlen. I mean, let's face it, folks, you think Ronald Reagan was a stumblebum that couldn't find his ass with both hands with a road map. You are living in the funny farm. That man was an evil, nasty, vicious Nazi. And in fact, the only truth he told in the deposition for the Poindexter trial is that, he sat there going, will I forget? Will I? I don't know. Will I forget? Will I forget? What? He gets all through and he goes, looks over at Poindexter and goes, wink. Poindexter never cracked a smile. He just sat there. I mean, the thing is, the guy was a masterful manipulator. And he did it on purpose. He did it on schedule. I go back and I look at the man and I say, God damn, once you can learn how to fake sincerity, you've got it made. That man faked sincerity better than anybody before or since.
Clinton can do it too, though.
Clinton, I think, is probably going to be about his peer.
Yeah, if that's his role. Remember, he stopped her after he won, and the first person he visited was Reagan.
That's right. And you know who Reagan visited every New Year's?
Annenberg.
Exactly. Who? Walter Annenberg, the Mafia Proconsul of North America.
Well, I'm glad that we could count on our heavy-hitting news organizations to demand promptly that 6-hour videotape deposition that Reagan did on the hostages be released to them. I mean, I thought they did an excellent job of remaining silent.
You mean the lapdogs actually, slobbered on the hand of their master?
Yeah, I seen Peter Jennings out there every night, right along with Brokaw, and geez, Ronnie or George Bush, why don't you let us watch our videotape deposition here of our ex-president?
Well, I'll tell you something about this damn Clinton. I mean, this guy is completing what Reagan and Bush started. I mean, he is taking the entire plutocratic policy, and he's getting all these. I have not for life figured out why there are all these trained SEALs out there going, I mean, I've listened to these people from the economics who work for Clinton, and that's nothing but Ronald Reagan you're hearing. It is 100% screw the people, make the plutocrats richer. That's all it is. It is trickle down with all kinds of, it's like sort of Mr. Rogers, you know, goes to Auschwitz. I mean, he makes it seem so attractive.
But that's called patriotism.
That's what I just said. I mean, what kind of brain death is going on in this country? You can get a lot of information in very odd places. I mean, Vanity Fair is not something that I, you know, would normally think of as investigative, you know, journal of the highest order, but they do have, you know, is everybody familiar with R.J.R. Nabisco, a fairly influential outfit? Well, they've got a new book out called Barbarians at the Gate, which deals with fun folks like Henry Kravis and others. And there's a nice, you know, section in this magazine from that book, exactly the way that the Anthony Summers book on J. Edgar Hoover is got a long excerpt from the book in the magazine, but they also have an excellent article on Vernon Jordan, and there's some really interesting stuff, because it turns out that his friends include people like Pamela Harriman, Alan Greenspan, the financier Theodore Frostman, the Tom Brokaw, Jack Kemp, Cyrus Vance, Henry Kissinger, Nancy Reagan, and in fact, he's on a first-name basis with George Bush. And in fact, at a certain point during the campaign, he was an advisor to both Bush and Clinton. Now, this puts him in a position where, shall we say, he can work both sides of the street. Anyway, also, one of his neighbors on Martha's Vineyard is Katharine Graham.
Who is this Vernon who?
Vernon Jordan. The hell did he get appointed to? He was head of the transition team. What's his position now, if any?
Not chief of staff.
No. Maybe he doesn't have an official position, but with this kind of a background, he doesn't need one. Yeah. He, well, I mean, he does get his shirts from London, custom made by Turnbull and Associates. He is a trustee of the Brookings Foundation, the Ford Foundation. He belongs to the Century Association of University Club in New York. He's a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, and the Bilderberg Group. And in fact, he took Bill Clinton to the 1991 Bilderberg meeting as his personal guest. Now, who outranks whom? From the sounds of this, very possibly Jordan actually outranks Clinton. And it's really, you know, interesting when you get to the heart of the power system. You find out that it's basically musical chairs in terms of everybody is part of the same group. There really isn't any major distinction to be found. And that, in fact, is why we will have various folks like Tom Foley commission an October surprise investigation, and lo and behold, they couldn't find a Day-Glo elephant in a phone booth. You know, there is no credible evidence that there was an October surprise. Whenever you hear the phrase credible evidence, get nervous.
Public safety or?
Yeah,
Social
they were,
Security?
yeah, or, you know, Law and Order, you know, I mean, there are a lot of times when, just the way people word things, you know that there is somebody playing some kind of game. And the phrase credible evidence has got to be one of those occasions. When I, you know, went through that, this October Surprise Task Force, I mean, it's just, you know, I ran through some of that earlier, but Jesus, I mean, this stuff is just bad beyond belief.
Is
But
that the total report? I mean, it's no thicker than that?
no, what this is
That's it.
only the executive summary.
Oh.
But here is something they said in here that I liked. And it does, in fact, I think, indicate that they understand that there, in fact, is a real problem afoot. Because I'll read you what they say in their section on standard of review, because I think there are a lot of people in Washington that are very conscious of the fact that they're real close to being, shall we say, out of business. Because if people do not believe them, do not respect them, and do not obey them, they're out of business. I mean, if everybody basically said, we are not going to do what you tell us anymore, then in fact they would be out of business. And they talk about that directly and explicitly. They say the principal allegations that were the focus of this investigation are extraordinarily serious and strike at the heart of the constitutional government of this country. The suggestion, in essence, that leaders of one of our two principal political parties would attempt to steal a presidential election by seeking to prolong the incarceration of fellow American citizens by foreign terrorists is little short of treachery. If true, it would not only call into question the legitimacy of an entire presidency, but expose a series of heinous acts unparalleled in the history of the American political system. While such conduct might be expected in certain dark corners of the world, it would be wholly beyond the wildest excesses in our constitutional history.
We've done worse things than that, right?
The assassination of John F. Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, nothing important.
Who cares about a few people being held up and around for a few extra days?
You know, 440 days, you know, being held hostage compared to the crimes that we can already document. CIA mind control experiments. Well, the thing that bothers me about Clinton is he hasn't said anything that's in any way different than Bush. I mean, literally, I mean, what is his policy in Somalia that is different than Bush's? I mean, what is it in Haiti? What is it in the Middle East? I mean, please remember Bush was bombing Iraq during the time that subsequent to the election and Clinton's being the president-elect, and every time Bush did anything, Clinton said, "Yay, right on, we're with you, buddy." You know, I mean, there is no difference. And the whole effort to do something with the economy has got to be one of the biggest con jobs I have ever heard. I mean, they can talk about taxing cigarettes and beer and alcohol and BTUs, and I mean, they'll talk about taxing everything except one thing, and that's wealth. I think it'd just be so wonderful if they put in a wealth tax, you know, and went after the people with the big bucks. I mean, I'd love to see Ross Perot cough up about $1 billion of the billion or so he stole.
That's only a day's wages.
Well, but I mean, I'm just saying, you cannot deal with the deficit unless, in fact, you go out and operate like, you know, the original Willie Sutton, and go where the money is. Well, the thing is, it's not the banks, but the bankers. The people, in fact, who have the real money own 50% of all the wealth in the entire country.
Speaking of which, is there any kind of
that is one of those stories that went blip and disappeared mid-screen. Has anybody read anything about any of that? Because I haven't.
Probably because of the disarray of the cabinets, who's gonna do it? You know, some people will go out of these banks that are hanging by a string, no one's doing it, right?
No, I don't buy that.
Oh,
That
well,
ain't
we all know
disarray.
who they are, though. I mean, the banks know who they are, but there's nobody, you know,
Well, in
Those
point
big
of
trusts-
fact, there is
things are in limbo right now, though, a lot of that stuff. I mean, you know,
well, it's absolutely
succession
amazing
stuff.
that just in the Pentagon, there are 44 appointments to sub-cabinet positions that have not been made. But in here I have a piece from Jack Anderson about 2 of the appointments he did make, which in fact are Bush Cold Warriors who were involved in pushing high-tech weaponry to third world countries, are now in, one's in the Pentagon and one is in the State Department, and they're now back in the same effective position that they were under Bush and or Reagan, and they're going to be doing exactly the same thing. They're going to be pushing the sale of high-tech weapons to third world countries. Now, how does this make Clinton any different?
Isn't Warren Christopher from the old school?
Well, he is a carryover from all of these regimes post the assassination of Kennedy.
Isn't the way that Clinton is different? That he supposedly is a Democrat, and with a Democratic Congress, he can get to your wallet faster. The Congress will help him get to your wallet.
Well, I hate to tell you this, but if you can find any meaningful difference between somebody like Bob Dole and Bill Clinton, I would like to see the scalpel you dissected the hair with. I mean, there is no. Can anybody give me a real difference between somebody like Dole and Clinton?
Yeah, I think
Watch the
job
wall.
retraining program is
Jennifer
also
Flowers
abortion
wouldn't go
rights.
for Bob Dole.
Speak up, Newell.
Abortion rights would be one area.
Okay, yeah.
Also this willingness to like get some money to people for job retraining, that's different.
That's for military people.
Training for what? Also, if Clinton were captured, he could be drawn and quartered. Dole would have to be broken up into thirds.
Clinton's got a, I don't know if it has anything to do with his knowledge of the person, but I think the Surgeon General stands on pro-medical marijuana use.
Okay, so we're talking now that if you go out to the very margin of some of the so-called cultural issues, Clinton is playing to a different constituency.
Well, he's a moderate. I mean, you know, the difference on the spectrum, the difference between Clinton and Bush, they're both central moderates. They're moderate, you know, central moderates. They're not, you know, they're two inches apart on the continuum.
Well, if the entire spectrum of political opinion was a mile wide, they'd be an inch apart.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Which makes one of them a liberal and the other one a conservative. Well, I mean, basically, we are caught in the position where, in fact, the power elite simply continues, and when somebody becomes a complete, I mean, let's face it. I mean, George Bush was about as attractive as what he did to the prime minister's pant leg. Nobody gave a rat's backside for Bush.
That's the difference right there.
So they simply brought in somebody who, in fact, had the patina of credibility, and it's a question of how soon that erodes.
Do you think that the Bush's credibility, had he been reelected, do you think that more stuff would have come in out of the open about him had he been reelected?
Well, I think Bush was getting real close to being, you know, undefendable. There are too many books, The Crimes of a President. I mean, stuff like this coming out. There were just too many smoking guns laying around. I mean, here was a guy who was directly involved in deregulating the S&Ls. Here was a guy who was in charge of the South Florida Task Force to stop cocaine trafficking. And during the 4 years that he headed the South Florida Task Force, the importation of cocaine doubled.
Clinton has made moves to deregulate things.
Well, please remember, Ted Kennedy signed up with Jimmy Peanut to deregulate the airlines at all. The collective insanity for privatization and deregulation is apparently no respecter of party label.
Would that make it, if they were deregulated, would that make it so only really wealthy people could apply?
What happens when you deregulate the fish tank and there's sharks in it? Pretty soon you only got one shark left. Well, I mean, that's about as difficult to figure out as, let's see, does the sun come up or doesn't it? I mean, my God, that's only happened every damn time in history. If you pay any attention to any of it, you go, oh yeah, that's the way it works. You know, it's like gravity. I mean, let's face it, dear old John D. Rockefeller I, had there not been anybody who said, yoo-hoo, you can't do that, by now there would be one oil company on the entire planet. You know, I mean, serious. There would be one oil company on the planet because that shark would have eaten every other shark in the tank. You know, and so what else is new? You know, there are certain other basic rules. People who want power shouldn't get it. No, I'm serious. That's a truth that goes clear back to the oldest scholarship of any and all societies. You had your hand up.
I mean, are we kidding ourselves, though, in blaming or praising a figurehead like Clinton or Bush? I mean, is it really coming down to him, or does that person not have the power that we attribute to him?
Well, let me suggest to you that that is a question that requires a totally schizophrenic answer. In that, I just ran down the list of connections of Jordan to everybody from Katharine Graham to George Bush, Jack Kemp, the Ford Foundation, the Brookings Institute, the Trilateral Commission, the Bilderbergers, the Council on Foreign Relations. Also, he goes to Bohemian Grove meetings every year out in California. I mean, let's face it. In the real world, he outranks Clinton in terms of his power position in the total society, but there is a thing called statutory power. There is a thing called the Constitution. There is, under the Constitution, the position of president, and in fact the president, having that constitutional position and trained with that, the statutory power as commander-in-chief of a executive branch which controls the Central Intelligence Agency, the Pentagon, and a few zillion other espionage, assassination, and murder incorporated systems. He's in a position where basically, if he wants to do something, in that sense, he could. The only qualifier is, if he tried, they'd kill him. I mean, that's why I have to give you sort of a schizoid answer. Because he could, but he couldn't. It depends. Yeah.
Then again, Vernon Jordan could be a token.
Could be a who?
A token.
He ain't just a token when he can pop down $550,000 for his little digs in D.C. And he, you know, I mean, no, we're talking about people with real power. We're talking about people who are not just tokens. It's like there are people who say, well, Katharine Graham, you know, I mean, hell, she's a woman, she doesn't have any power. You cross Katharine Graham and you had better watch out for concrete booties. Well, allegedly her husband committed suicide, but there are some of us who suspect it was assisted. And it wasn't by Kevorkian.
Depression?
He did, he got depressed, it was the same thing.
Exactly, he got depressed. You know, the interesting thing is that there were a number of people who dropped dead very conveniently.
Abby Hoffman.
Well, I was going to talk about a specific case. I mean, if we want to just shotgun, I mean, we could be here all night thinking up names. There are more than we could come up with in the next hour. But the interesting thing is, after John F. Kennedy was assassinated, not everybody in the country had collective frontal lobotomy. There were a number of people who were a little suspicious of what in fact had really happened, how it had happened, and a lot of people just did not buy the story about the lone nut. One of those people was, according to some reports, Estes Kefauver, who in fact had been involved in one of the major investigations of organized crime. And Estes Kefauver dropped dead of an instant, massive coronary attack, and that was kind of interesting because he wasn't that old. He had no history of any heart problems. But bingo, away he went. And then Phil Graham got depressed and did himself in. And there was just this whole sort of wave of people who died right at that period. And there seemed to be sort of waves of this, you know, around different cases. But you can go and read a wonderful book like this called Encyclopedia of Assassinations. And you can find out that it is published by Facts on File, 1991. And you can turn to the JFK case, and you can read the most absolutely unremitting BS on the planet. It is absolutely right out of, you know, Time, Life. It's junk, it's garbage. And you find out why by going to the bibliography. You whip back here to the bibliography and you find David Beelan, Final Disclosure. G. Robert Blakey and Richard N. Billings, The Plot to Kill the President. And you find out that in fact there is nothing here by MARCLEY, nothing here by Garrison, nothing here by Jim Mars, nothing here by Anthony Summers, nothing here by any of the major critics and researchers. Harold Weisberg is not in here. I mean, Facts on File? Ha! Government disinformation on file, bozos. I mean, you can read this and still be as ignorant as the day you were born. Only the difference is you will believe a lot of things that aren't true. And as far as I'm concerned, I would rather meet a person who's ignorant than a person who's misinformed. Because in order to get a person fired up with real information, you got to take the information they think they have, which is phony, that is backwards, that is totally corrupted by a completely dishonest information system, and you got to remove it. You got to unlearn the nonsense before you can learn the facts. And I mean, I really resent things like this. I mean, I consider this to be the absolute poisoning of the well. You know, the bibliography tells me everything I need to know. The man deliberately, willfully, and consciously, with intent, wrote this information.
It's an expensive edition, too.
Yeah, well, he does pretty good on Caesar.
Has a nice cover.
Well, but he does a good job on Caesar. You know.
Oh, Julius Caesar.
Yeah.
Which is, no, not who is he, but
Who is the author?
no, the job? You said he does a great job. and-
On the assassination of Julius Caesar. That was another guy who got bumped off, but that was about 2,000 years ago.
Well, maybe in 2,000
It's safe.
years.
You can write about an assassination 2,000 years ago and tell the truth.
Did he do it accurately on Lincoln?
I didn't, I mean, I just read, I just sort of went, no! You know, ready to do a primal scream.
What's that?
I wonder what your opinion is. Despite the details and the fact that the general population does not know, I mean, does it appear that they subconsciously or somehow really do have a feeling that things are corrupt and things are this awful, and they just don't want to...
I don't find, it's amazing. I mean, literally, I don't know, I guess apparently a lot of people watch this thing on TV, you know, but every time I turn around, somebody will say, oh, hey, you're Ace, you run that seminar thing, I watch on television, man, that's right on. Or, you know, something to that effect. I mean, today it was the FedEx driver went charging by me and said, oh, I know you, you know. And so, I mean, I'm getting very few negative calls. I mean, I did have one the other day that called me a no-good commie. And I just felt so nostalgic. I thought, God, here I am back in the 60s in my prime, you know.
In answer to your question on part of my own family, I went back to the hinterlands in Nebraska, and my older brother, who was a radical in the 60s, intended to become a county attorney for 8 years.
Woo! That was a switch.
Anyway, I was telling him about the Dan Quayle protest where people were getting arrested for young rappers and left at the protest and stuff, and just the way the police state situation that we're in. And his plea to me was not to deny the reality, but to let him live his life in the hinterland and be undisturbed by first-hand experience.
That's called denial.
From a survival. The question is, though, if you accept that the country, which you, for years, say you're 60 years old, you believed in all this time, your son died in a war for, all this shit goes down, you've been living here all your life and believing in it. Now, if you accept the fact that it's all been a fraud, all been a scam, and you're the sucker, then where does that leave you? And how do you live your life? You know,
I'll tell you, you're asking a very important question. That is a real, I mean, you are just right there focused on a key issue. Because for a person, like you said, somebody who's 60 years old, spent their whole life, put their kid in the service, you know, lost one, got him back in a box, you know, for them to say, man, this whole thing was BS, I was lied to, I was had, I was used, I was manipulated, that is a real hard thing for people to do. Emotionally, it's very difficult to say, I have been a sucker. But you know, it's funny, I have not yet had anybody throw a chair at me when I ask how to spell veteran. It's spelled S-U-C-K-E-R. And I haven't had anybody jump up and throw a chair at me yet. And if you can hit somebody between the eyes with that, and they don't go ballistic, then in fact there is a vast sense of absolute visceral outrage. And I'll tell you where it's going to come from. It's going to come from this right here. Here is Jack Mormon Anderson with, let's see, 5 of their 9 children and 12 of their 25 grandchildren. And if problems with Social Security are not squarely faced, the program itself could become insolvent. Fixing the system could provoke a battle between generations. Thus, a question emerges for retirees. how much can we sacrifice for our children? Now, you are going to see the most massive propaganda campaign to absolutely destroy the Social Security system. You're going to see it on a national level exactly the way you have seen Measure 5 being used by the most cynical bastards in the state of Oregon to get a sales tax through. You're going to see the absolute destruction of everything called entitlement. Now, let me ask a question. If you buy insurance on your car and you're out there driving and you run into something and the insurance company says to you, well, we don't feel that we ought to pay your entitlement, you're going to say what to that insurance company? You're going to grab somebody and pull their sweet ass across the desk and say, look, sucker, this ain't no entitlement. This is, in fact, why I bought the insurance. Now, what happens when you change the label? It used to be, it was called benefits. You received benefit from your insurance policy, right? That's why you bought it. Now you buy an insurance policy and they change the payback from the insurance company to an entitlement, and you're no longer entitled. And Anderson is my favorite mattress back. I always call him Old Mattress Back, but I didn't realize how literal it was. The man has run disinformation for the CIA. One of his best buddies is Frank Sturgis, one of the Watergate burglars and one of the Kennedy assassins. He is a true scumbag. And he and every major conduit in this country is out to, they're not trying to get rid of entitlement. They're trying to increase the impoverishment of the people. Because you've got, if you want to steal more, you've got to impoverish more. And what we have is the most absolutely psychotic bunch of kleptocrats that ever came down the pipe.
Well, but here's why empires fail. There are three historically inevitable conditions which infect every empire and ensure its failure. First, the rich redistribute an ever greater share of the wealth to themselves. Second, their commitment to military power to effect control over the known world becomes open-ended. Third, they refuse to fund their military system. You know, therefore, the cost moves ever further ahead of available funds. Debts must increase at a geometric rate. Under this system of dynamic conditions, the debt must either be monetarized or borrowed. If it is monetarized, it will produce basically hyperinflation. If it is borrowed, the interest cost will increase to infinity. I mean, how complicated is it to figure out? You know, I mean, it's not that complicated to figure out. That's what sunk Rome, that's what sunk Britain, and that's what's going to sink America. You know, imperial hubris.
How long do you get it?
Pardon?
Yeah.
Well, that's like asking a brick, how long do you give it, you know? Well, I don't know, that depends. Now,
Took Rome, what, 600 years?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a long time.
How long did it take England?
How about Argentina?
But things move faster.
Well, let me remind you the story of the guy that stepped off the top of the Empire State Building. No parachute, no bungee cord, just, stepped right off. And he's going by the second-story window. And the guy inside looks out, sees him going by, and says, hey, I think you've got a problem. And the guy looks in and says, what do you mean? Nothing's happened yet.